Okay, we're going to get started. And a very warm welcome to our 66th Security Thought Leadership webinar. We've been here every Tuesday and Thursday, some other days too, where at this time we debate a topic of central importance to the security world. And the idea of thought leadership is that we critique what's going on today in order we get a better type of security tomorrow. And today the topic is one that's been at the forefront of previous webinar subjects, the relationship between crisis management and security. How closely are they aligned now? Some are saying more, some are saying less, some are saying one should take over the other, and it's been argued both ways. Well, we're going to put it towards a panel today to debate this. We're delighted that we've got some representatives from the Institute of Strategic Risk Management with us today. And I'm going to invite our four panelists to introduce themselves. And when they have done that, I'm going to ask them each for their opening statement. And after that, we're going to come to you, the audience, for questions. Please get your questions in early. It's going to be business, quick business, because there's a lot of interest around the world. Without further ado then, let's get to the panel and let's ask them each to introduce themselves. Let me start with Alan. Can you please introduce yourself first? Alan.
Hi, yes I can. I'm Alan Kane. I'm the head of the Manchester chapter of the Institute of Strategic Risk Management. And in my day job, I'm an EPRR, which is Emergency Preparedness, Resilience and Response Manager for the NHS in Greater Manchester. Thank you.
Thank you very much indeed, Alan. And over to Paris, an interesting place at the moment. Bruno, can you introduce yourself, please?
Hello, Martin. Hello, everyone. So I'm Bruno Séché. I'm founder of Integralim. I'm an international consultant in food integrity and head of the French chapter of the ISRM.
Thank you very much indeed. And Paul, over to you. Can you introduce yourself, please?
Yes, hello everybody. I'm Paul Bean. I'm a leader in security within the Royal Mail Group, and I'm currently head for business resilience as well for the group.
Thank you very much indeed. And finally to David. David, can you introduce yourself, please?
Hi, I'm David Rubins. I'm the Executive Director of the Institute of Strategic Risk Management.
Thank you very much indeed. What we're going to do now, then, we're going to invite our panelists to for their opening statement. If you've got questions, audience, please can you use the question and answer button at the bottom of your screen. Get your questions in early. Let's go to Alan. Alan, your opening statement, please.
Hi, yeah, I'm kind of in terms of the actual question of today's thought leadership webinar, I'm very much on both sides. In terms of my own background, I started out in business continuity during the Y2K project. I then moved into corporate security, spent the best part of 10 years there before becoming head of security and emergency planning in the university sector. And now I work totally in emergency planning in the NHS. The way I see things, crisis management and security are two sides of the same coin. And what I mean by that is essentially there are only three ways of reducing risk. The very first one is that you reduce the threat. The second one is that you reduce vulnerability. And the third is that you reduce impact. And to my mind, crisis management, security management are collectively needed in order to achieve that. So what do I mean by that? Well, what I mean is if I were to ask how you reduce threat, if I were to talk about what is threat to a security professional, they probably talk about threat in terms of criminal behavior. They probably talk about threat in terms of terrorist activity. They might, if they've got a cyber orientation, talk about the threat from hackers. And they might, if they're working for a government organization, talk about the threat from hostile foreign states. So they'll have their own picture on what threat is. A BC professional, well, to their mind, they might talk about severe weather. They might talk about flooding. They might talk about widespread electricity failures, or they might, as is relevant today, talk about pandemics, okay? But unless you look at both of those holistically, you're not going to get the answers that you want. When it comes to reducing vulnerability, I think probably having a game played for both sides, I think security probably take the lead on this point. You know, security will see vulnerability in terms of physical security vulnerabilities, perhaps vulnerabilities in the Guard forces numbers or training. They might talk in terms of cyber security vulnerabilities, you know, issues around firewalls. They might even, if there's an insider threat, talk about personnel security, okay, and the importance of vetting and screening. This part of the aspect is probably security's key domain. In terms of reducing impact, I'd argue completely the opposite. I'd argue that here, this is where the crisis management, the emergency planning, the business continuity professional, this is where they really, really come to the forefront. They will plan and mitigate the impact of that threat happening, okay? And they will do so in a way that's cause agnostic. Now, what I mean by that is they will typically make plans for loss of premises, for loss of staff, for loss of IT, and for loss of supply chain. Okay, now if we take the loss of premises as an example, the plans that a business continuity professional will be put in place will work for the loss of that corporate head office, whether it's been taken out as part of a fire, whether it's flooded, whether it's caught up in a bomb cordon, it will all be dealt with under that same plan. Similarly, the plans that are put in place for loss of staff, again, are cause agnostic. These plans will apply whether the staff are on strike, whether they can't get in because of a disruption in the transport service to get them into work, or whether it's actually just a simple case of they can't come into work because they're self-isolating due to a pandemic. I guess what I'm really trying to say here is that it's a false argument. Both sides are needed for this to work.
Alan, thank you very much.
Both sides working together.
Thank you very much indeed, Alan. I'm going to move to Bruno. Bruno, your opening statement.
Thank you, Martin.
Please. Bruno.
Yeah, thank you. Where, from the perspective in the food supply chain, where I'm working on, this is a very interesting topic, and especially in this COVID time, we have all noticed that the food supply was had a crucial role, and the food supply chain is very, very complex. You know that the food that we eat in every of our countries comes from all over the world, and in this food supply chain and at the end food continuity, because we want to make sure that the food comes to our plates, there are a lot of threats. There are threats which are related to safety issue. There are threats which are related to fraud issues, and we have seen during the COVID time that this was something which was growing. There are also threats which are related to food defense issue. That means people trying to get into the supply chain and potentially harm the people who are receiving this food. And of course, there are food safety issues due to the problems or issues during the process. And there are also food security issues, which is not the security we are talking about, but how do I get the food to the people who need it? And all this, the supply chain may have, of course, disruptions. And this is what we can see as crisis. And in the way today the crisis management is handled in food companies, very often they are separated because of the type of crisis. They have different experts. In my view, it is very important, as Alan was saying, that there is a holistic view. It doesn't matter who's leading the crisis management team or the business, call it business continuity, call it emergency preparedness and response. The most important thing is that the company sees this as a strategic aspect and deals with that holistically. And as we have all learned, the most important thing is are the 3P, right? So plan, 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 or prepare, prepare, prepare. And in this preparation, everybody should be on board. Doesn't matter if it's security expert, safety expert, crisis management expert, all should be on board. It is very important that crisis management is really seen as, and crisis preparation, I would say, is really seen as a strategic element of the management of the company, because without this preparation, you can be submitted to any event, as we have seen in the last months. So that was my last statement.
Thank you very much indeed, Bruno. Paul, your opening statement, please.
So for me and my group, the Royal Mail Group, we deal with both business continuity or business resilience, as we are now calling it, and security under the same umbrella. My part of that is we have to look at it in 4 different pots. Obviously, we suffer from regulatory security, in relation to aviation security, for instance, the sector, for instance, Ofcom, other regulatory bodies. Then we look at our estate, buildings, infrastructure, network. Then we look at our people, either interests or protection of our people. And lastly, our products and processes and how we keep them secure and maintain our functionality, in times of crisis, but more to the forefront in terms of COVID, the new normal. In relation to this current webinar, for me, we've got an opportunity here to redefine definitions. People have got different definitions across different business sectors about what business continuity is, what it should be, how it should interact with security, how it shouldn't. Is it a standalone function? Is it an enabler, a protector, or is it a driver for business? Is business continuity really business resilience? Business continuity alludes to it is a continuing function. Resilience is, can we continue to deliver and thrive? Are both security and business continuity looked at as a function that keeps the train on the rails, or should they be seen as constructively driving the train to the next destination and beyond? In that, I think there is a need for our industries and our functions to come to a common understanding of this. In the Royal Mail Group, this is all dealt with under a compliance and sustainability head. So there's a more joined up, mature conversation that drives us to look at and understand not just how we deal with crisis, because I think as companies have matured themselves, they've developed their own methodology for dealing with crisis, be it bomb threats, be it weather threats, etc. But how we now, with the change in the economic landscape, the reduction in staff in many organisations, the reduction in profit, different ways of dealing with business, e-commerce come online, how can we look at what we currently describe as business continuity and security? How can we understand how they're going to work together and be, as an earlier panelist described, two sides of the same coin, interlock with each other at every step of the way.
Thank you very much indeed, Paul. And just to say to the audience, if you can ask your questions on the question answer button at the bottom of your screen, once we've heard from David, we'll come to audience discussion. Okay, let's get to David. David, your opening statement, please.
Thank you, Martin. Basically, all of the above. I agree with all of the above. I think it's very interesting that Paul used the phrase, I think, grown up and mature. And I think that we have seen that over the last, certainly over probably most of our careers. In a slightly different context, one of the words is convergence, which tends to be sort of operations plus technology. But I think we've also seen a natural convergence between the different aspects of organizational security and risk management. And in its very, very basic terms, I think security is probably protective, in that we're trying to protect something we believe we can protect ourselves from the world. Crisis management is not. Crisis management are things that we cannot control. We can't control the earthquake. We can't control the pandemic. We can't influence a satellite failure. So crisis management is very much about, I think, consequence management. But the truth of the matter is that when you have a crisis, very, very much it is your frontline security people who are the first people who have to deal with that situation. And I think it's interesting because, Martin, I know that you spent probably most of your career talking about the fact that we're using the wrong terminology when we describe security. Because I would imagine, and myself included, when we look at the title of that security, we probably think about low-paid security officers on the front line, you know, doing patrols or looking after doors or access control. But actually, it is much more significant than that. It's about maintaining the functionality of an organization in an often chaotic world. And those are the people who are both have the sensitivity to what's happening around them, but also often the first responders in the case that something happened. We just have to look at what happened to the Manchester Arena with our two young security guards, you know, who are, in hindsight, had the opportunity to to detect a very, very major and significant attack, 23 deaths, 800 injuries. But I think that any organization now that tries to stovepipe those functions is really, really creating some serious vulnerabilities within their own organization. And the more that we can, I think that the main word is integration, isn't it? You know, we need to see integrated operations, but we need to make sure that the people responsible for that on both sides and on all sides, and in terms of corporate oversight, have an understanding of the value it brings. The reason you have that integration is not as a grudge spend, but because it makes you more able to deal effectively with the myriad risks that we are facing and will continue to face in the foreseeable future.
David, thank you very much indeed. Well, let's get straight to questions. 4 interesting opening statements that all of you have raised some important points. Let me ask each of you this question first. And Simon Chan's posed it. And if I could just ask for a very brief answer, I'm not looking for an exhaustive one, I'm looking for a brief answer. The key learning points that have come out of this crisis, what's been going wrong? Bruno, key learning points, headline issues, please, very quickly, if you wouldn't mind.
Well, I think it's the lack of preparation that has been really going wrong in the last crisis, and also the lack of learning from previous crises, which is also related. So learning is really key, I think, in crisis management. How to learn from the past experiences.
Thank you, Alan. What's the key learning points? You're on mute, Alan.
Alan, you're embarrassing us, man. You're embarrassing yourself.
Apologies. So totally agree. There was opportunities to learn these lessons with both SARS and MERS, and we failed to do so. So totally agree with that one. The other one I'd add is the major problem we face at the moment is the lack of any leader in the Western world being able to articulate a clear exit strategy.
Yeah, like that one. Paul?
I would say that there's an understanding that commerce is not siloed and businesses should not operate in their own silo. In its nature, business is an interwoven landscape, and as such, one is whilst one should be focused on one's own business, there's also a pressing need to understand the threats and risks for your partner industries, so we can work together.
Okay, David, you in your opening statement made the point there's maturity here. Some of those answers suggest to me the complete opposite is true. There's like gross immaturity and a gross lack of taking the opportunity to learn, not being prepared for a crisis of this length. This has looked very, very bad for the business continuity world, hasn't it?
To a certain extent, it has. I wouldn't blame the business continuity world, but I think it's made us question what our understanding of crisis management is. The word that I've been using, I put up a blog a couple of days ago, is about resilience, and the misuse of the misunderstanding of that resilience from everybody from corporates to consultants to governments. Resilience is not what you do after an event has happened. Resilience is what you do to prepare for an event before it happens. If you're not resilient before an event, you don't suddenly become resilient afterwards. So I think that to go back to Alan's point, you know, COVID itself as a pandemic is only a mid-level pandemic. It's not, it's not a big one. It's not a really bad one. You know, Ebola has 50% mortality rate. We're nowhere near that. But I would say that there's that lack of understanding of what that readiness means. And I'd go back to the point, lack of leadership, but also lack of an acknowledgement of the expertise that people who understand what crisis management means. Crisis management expertise may not allow you to get everything right, but it allows you to stop making stupid mistakes. And I think there's been a lot of stupid mistakes made because there hasn't been an understanding of some of the issues around classic understanding of what crisis management is. My last point, crises are chaotic and they're complex, but they are not random. You know, there is a pattern to them. And anybody who understands that and brings that capability to the game brings something of benefit.
Okay, thank you very much indeed. I'm going to come to Paul next. Paul, this point from Mark Rowe, and it builds on what some of you were saying, David's last point there, is that this has been a bit different, this one, and or it's been perceived to be different because it's lasted so long. Do we really know what a crisis means now, Paul? Is there confusion about what it really means?
That comes back to my earlier point about definitions. So, you know, a crisis is something that you can work together to contain, to get over a hump, and then establish an element of normality and move on. And then look back behind us and learn from such a crisis, and then obviously extend that learning. We're having to look back in our rearview mirror at a crisis that is still happening and evolving. And that is a new skill for all of us. And this crisis, or the pandemic as it is at the moment, affects people in different ways, changes behaviour, changes society behaviour, changes the way people buy their goods in commerce, etc. It is literally evolving, and sometimes it's one step forward, two steps back, and there's a necessity to learn from that behaviour and to become more agile in both our thought processes and our actions.
Yeah, interesting point. I mean, Bruno, to what extent has this shown up that both, perhaps on both sides, if I could just call it that, the crisis management world and the security world, that the fact of the matter is, as David said, they neither was prepared enough, and that in itself is about the lack of those two worlds really getting themselves together in terms of qualifications, regulations, standards sorted out. What it's shown up is both sides lack it, and both sides have suffered accordingly. Bruno, can we put some blame there?
I think that obviously between different expertise to deal with events like this one or other ones, this lack of communication, this lack of learning how to deal with it together is at the front line. And I think in this crisis management, which is the way, as I learned from the best, of one of the best, crisis COVID is an incident. It's not a crisis. The crisis, we made the crisis through the lockdown, right? The crisis, it was the economical crisis that we face. And what we see is that in this kind of crisis or others, and we talked about leadership, it's the communication is the problem, that we leave some expert take the lead in communication, and then another takes the communication, and they don't seem to work together. So I think that indeed the collective learning is key in how to handle this kind of crisis, and the decision making, of course.
Yeah, okay. I mean, Alan, same question to you. It's Gary Shield's point, or at least a question that raises this point, which is about whether the two sides have really sort of got to blame themselves from not getting their act together in a way that would have optimized the potential to be really effective now. It's shown up some gaps in understanding on both sides. Alan?
I can agree with that to some extent. I mean, if you look at the way it works in terms of the police, fire, ambulance service, the NHS, and the commonality that we have through GESIP in terms of interoperability, in terms of terminology, in terms of definitions, that is clearly lacking in terms of the private security world and the private business continuity world. And I agree from that point. Where I'd be inclined to disagree is that to many business continuity managers out there that I know were making observations about what a pandemic would look like. We're making observations about the other big one, which is what a mass widespread electricity failure would look like. And it was their boards that were ignoring them, not putting the effort into exercising, not putting the effort into training, to testing, to validating. So I think if there is blame in terms of business continuity and security, it's about not being joined up in the way the emergency services and the NHS are. However, I think there's also a higher corporate failing in terms of the leadership and recognizing those threats when they were being identified.
No, that's interesting. David, would you agree with that? Would you put some blame there that the leadership didn't really get it?
Yes, I mean the answer is, I mean, two things. One from the reality of COVID, and one is from academic work, which I'm sure you're aware of. I mean, Rittel and Webber's 1973 work on wicked problems. This is a wicked problem. I mean, they had 10 principles of managing a non-rational wicked problem, which this to a certain extent is. The first 9 are technical, but the last one is very simple, and it says the planner has no right to be wrong. You do not have the right to be wrong, because getting things wrong has consequences. And I think there's a lot of things that were got wrong through incompetence, or through lack of understanding, or through sometimes ego and political bad will. But the truth of the matter is that COVID itself, as Alan said and others have said, this should not have escalated to the stage it did. However, given that we are in that state, the thing about a crisis is you always underestimate what's going to happen. So, for example, the UK's government's official estimation of deaths from a pandemic was 250 people. That was the numbers that they were working on. The initial projection for funding for COVID support back in March was £12 billion, and we're over 200 billion now. So I think it's the nature of the scale. And if I can just take 10 seconds to Gary Shield's point, which he made about the comment I made about the 2 guards in Manchester. Gary, in no way was I trying to put any responsibility on them. It was a throwaway comment. Happy to have a chat about that. I agree it's systemic, but I wasn't blaming the guards in any way whatsoever.
Okay, thank you. Well, let's go to a different subject now. And Graham Kittering here has picked up on something that I think is really cropped up a lot in previous webinars. And it goes something like this. We can point to successes and we can point to things that we've learned from this crisis. But one of the realities is that the security and the crisis management world get carried away in the crisis because that's when they shine. And of course they shine, they're supposed to shine in that world. But we've got economic hardship coming, it looks like, across the world. And we also know what happens then. What happens then is there's a more negative view of those two worlds. So if there has been any sort of gains, it's very short terms. They're about to get back in their box. And that's the reality of the way that world works. Paul, do you fear that's the case from your perspective?
Yes, I do, in certain aspects, and then not in others. And I think the current situation the world finds itself in, they're going to be blunt, winners and losers. For example, in the logistics world, we're seeing different buying patterns, and people won't be going to the supermarket, the high street to buy their Christmas presents. They'll be buying them online and sending them around the world. Now, for my business, there's going to be an increase in the amount of parcels that's been going around the world. So we need to adjust to that. So it's not just in relation to threats and security threats in relation to business continuity and resilience. It's, we might need hundreds more staff to be able to cope with an increase in demand, which potentially is good for the business, but if it's not handled in the right way, could be a negative. So it's about adapting to the changing environment.
Okay, and a good question to ask you. You've got a foot in both camps. Do you see that any gains that have been made are really going to be lost by the reality that post this pandemic, it's going to be austerity, and we know what happens there?
I totally agree with the point you're making. From a purely practical point of view, I think that's a larger threat to the security profession than to the business continuity profession. If you look at any corporate entity out there and the number of BC professionals in it, it's a relatively small number. By contrast, if you look at the size of security forces, you might have 40 or 50 officers involved in a particular building or operation. That obviously is sadly where people will misguidedly place cuts. So I agree with the point you're making. There is that risk that people will make the wrong decision and try to save money by cutting security personnel. It's the wrong decision, but I think it's more of a threat to the security side of things than to the BC side.
Bruno, do you see that any gains made are going to be temporary rather than permanent? Bruno?
Well, it's difficult to say. What we see, for instance, in the food supply chain world, is that indeed this continuity in the business, this COVID has shown how complex, even more how complex the supply chain were, the disruption that we had. So there will be also a review about how to have more sustainable supply chains, and therefore maybe reduce some vulnerabilities and threats. But from the crisis management perspective, I think that the food industry has been in crisis almost every day of the COVID to know how to deal with the situation. And I believe that this will stay rather permanently, that this need to have really a preparation for other crises. And there are other crises currently, recalls are still getting along. And I think that management is understanding that this is something that was lacking in some point. So I think that there is a positive effect for the crisis management, business continuity, and even security aspect of it.
Okay, thank you very much. Interesting points have been made. And now let me come to you, David. And I've got a question from Melissa Mack. Now, Melissa was actually on the webinar on Tuesday on the panel, where she was arguing the case for how we create a consistency around the world in security. And of course, one of the points she's made here is, what lessons can be learned from this slow burn crisis that can be applied to both security and crisis management program for future crises? And I think it's a really good point, because some of the other questions, David, are asking about a similar point. What is it about this that, if anything, we're going to be able to apply to future ones? David, if anything.
If anything, no, I think there has to be. If we can claim that we can do this stuff, we have to be able to bring solutions to the table, not just when it's comfortable for us, but when the challenge is on. I think we can. And Martin, I have to say, because of you, I mean, I was on your master's program at Leicester 20 years, or almost 20 years ago. I would go back to fundamentals. I think many people here do the martial arts. You go to Kihon, you go to your basics, you go to your fundamentals. And what are the fundamentals? Sensitivity to your environment, ability to communicate, agility, adaptability, leadership, learning, spare capacity if you have it. There's no question about it. The spare capacity brings you a level of resilience which you do not have if you don't. But above all, be a learning organization. Be a learning organization. The greatest gift to a risk or crisis manager is a near miss, because a near miss allows you to check out how good you are. And what we should see now, this is not the bad one, we should see this as a near miss and learn from it. And if we do, we are in with a chance. And if we don't, then we're just going down a false path. There is no magic to this.
I mean, David, in your position, where you run an institute and you see quite a wide breadth of activity, in your view, do you think the world of crisis and security management, those two worlds, have done well during the crisis or not?
It's as everybody says, it depends up to a point. I don't think governments have. I think there have been, Jacinda Ardern in New Zealand, and there's a couple of people. Overall, I don't think governments have done very well. I think organizations have done better. One of the things which I would really like to have seen, I'm sure Alan will back me up on this, is I'd have liked to have seen communities being seen as a strategic resource. You empower communities to get stuff done. You empower communities to have ownership of what they do.
For example, I don't understand. For
example, tracing and testing, for imposing lockdowns, for creating back to school policies. Those have all been imposed from the centre to outlying areas around the country. And it's not effective, but B, it creates opposition and polarization and antagonism. One of the things I think which is unique, actually I'm pretty sure it's unique about this crisis over another crisis, is purely the time to recovery. We're used to having crisis as a failure of something and then returning within 12 hours or 3 days or something. I don't think anybody factored in the fact that 7 months later, not only are we not out of it, we're about to go into a pretty damn hard second wave of lockdowns. So I think we have to see communities being seen as a much more effective resource. I don't think they've been utilised yet.
Yeah, okay. And I'm going to come to you, Paul. Now, I'm going to ask you the same questions. Do you think that those two worlds, speaking generally, have done well out of this. I mean, Mike Cummings is enforcing this point. Have they done well? Would you say they've come out good, Paul?
Well, yeah, to follow on from David said, and I echo a lot of what he said, I think that our world, business continuity and security, has been recognised that as a permanent seat at the top table, to coin a phrase, and is the COVID situation has seen us now as fundamental to success in the commercial world. I think, without a shadow of a doubt.
Why do you say that, David? Paul,
well,
where's the evidence? Where's the evidence for that? Because that's a biggie. That's a really big point to make, and a great one.
Yeah. No. Well, so what I would say is that where we have an event that comes and goes, like a crisis, we've now got an event that is a continuing of the new normal, and there are changes on a almost daily basis that businesses have to adapt to. And when a business adapts and changes its functionality, part of that change in functionality is a review of that change by security professionals to establish whether or not it's fit for purpose and the business can be protected going forward. So you become a permanent fixture at these decision-making processes, within these decision-making processes. One thing I would add, though, and I saw the word local resilience forums pop up on the screen by obviously a contributor. I would question how much the commercial world has been brought into local resilience forums to help states.
Whose fault is that? Whose fault is that?
I don't know. I don't know whose fault that is. But what we get is a global pandemic, which hits every aspect of society, and we get the government and government agencies dealing with this as a silo. I just question, and I don't know the answer to this, how much help and assistance have traditional government agencies asked from the business world, and how much interlocking has there been going forwards?
Interesting point. Bruno, let's talk about the food world. Now, you've already said earlier that you feel some of the changes are permanent. Do you think that therefore the two worlds have come out well? And it's two worlds of security and crisis management I'm talking about generally. Bruno.
Well, I don't know if they have come out well, but they have worked together, and we can see it. And to come to this sort of point about global versus local, I think that locally, and I would agree that locally, the people have taken responsibility. They have worked on their supply chain. They have worked on their premises, on their company, with their employees, what they could do, what they could not do, how to secure the business continuity, the food production without risk for the employees, without risk for the consumers. And of course, the upper you go in the chain, and if you go global, then it's more complicated. And there are some decisions, not specifically to the food sector, where you see that private and public have not been working so well. So I would say security and crisis management, yes, for sure. But private and public was not that well managed. In France, we have seen, for instance, hospitals which were empty and were supposed to get people from tested positive, and nobody came. And we've seen also private clinics which had beds, and nobody was asking at the beginning of the crisis if they could have some COVID patients. So I think that locally, there was this working together, but globally, no.
Okay, and I'm going to come to you now because I would like to get your thoughts on this. I mean, you in your intro, you made the point that you've got history in both camps there. Are you happy to say that one group has done better than the other out of this?
I think, as I said, they're two sides to the same coin. both groups have done extremely well. I think the issue with security was at the very start of the crisis. The excellent work that they were doing was largely underappreciated and not recognized by the wider public. And as an example of that, I'd point to the very simple difficulties that there were around getting key worker letters for security professionals. You know, to those of us in the NHS or the police, the fire and rescue, the ambulance service, those letters came instantly, and together with our ID cards, that was the key worker. That was something that Ian Todd in the SIA had to actually physically fight for. So yes, but security, it took time for that recognition to occur, would be my answer.
Okay, thank you very much indeed. I'm going to ask you all just for a final quick comment. I mean, Michael Gibbs, who's doing some work on behalf of the SIS Foundation, a survey on this topic at the very moment, has mentioned some of the confusion in terminology and job roles that have come out of this. I want to ask you one final question, if you might. 10 seconds each, no more, please. Your final thoughts on what's the key change that most needs to emerge from this? What's the key change you most want to see coming out of this crisis? Paul?
Mature debate leading to interoperability between security and business resilience.
I like that. Thank you very much indeed, Paul. Bruno?
Well, for me, it's really learning who your stakeholders are and engaging and communicating with them to prepare with both sides of the medal, if we want, to prepare for future crises. So not discover who the stakeholders are when the crisis is there. So prepare.
Like that. Thank you very much. Nice and succinct. Alan, just in 10 seconds, please, your thoughts.
The importance of exercising and the importance of learning lessons from others rather than having to make those mistakes yourself.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you. Particularly in a crisis lasting this long. And David, you wrote to me a while back and said if there's an opportunity to be involved in a webinar that suits me, let me know. And I'm delighted you decided to join us and the Institute work with us on this. It seems only right to give the final comment to you, David.
I think it's about integration. It's about, crisis managers are facilitators. They're not solvers, they're facilitators. And the more you facilitate integration of multiple stakeholders, then that's both externally, geographically, broadly, jurisdictionally, but also down into the community level, that brings value to the game. Do not be exclusive. Be integrative, be welcoming, be open. That will have benefit.
Thank you. And that's a drum I know that you've been banging for quite a long time. Gentlemen, thank you so much indeed for your insights and for your observations. Absolutely fantastic. Thank you very much indeed to the audience for your questions. I'm so sorry we couldn't get through them all. I tried to incorporate them. Lots of ideas coming up from that. I'll be writing a blog. It'll be on the website tomorrow, I promise you, highlighting what some of these issues are. What's clearly emerged from this is there are great opportunities to learn, not just about this crisis, but about other ones too, albeit this one has proved to be testing, not least because it's lasted so long and because it's led to so many different changes. And perhaps David's point is, this is a learning exercise, others can be worse, is a major takeaway point and one that we need to think more deeply about. And I certainly will on the back of those insights today. I just said very quickly to let you know that when we're talking about outstanding performance, OSPA nominations. In Germany, it's the last day to enter. You've got to get them in by midnight tonight. And in Romania, you've got till midnight tomorrow night. So please do get your entries in. In South Africa, you have got till mid-February, but why not do it now? Date for your diary, please. 24th of November, Thought Leadership Summit and presentation of the Benelux OSPAs. Please look there for that on the 24th of November. You can register free, and that's going to be a good afternoon, I promise you. Kenya will be announced soon, the OSPAs for Kenya. Just to let you know, the Tackling Economic Crime Awards ceremony announced for the 9th of December. The very best in economic crime are going to be there all on one day. You're going to, if you've thought online presentations haven't been very good, wait till you see this one. I promise you that. Register for thetechers.com for a different type of award ceremony. Finally, we go through it all again next Tuesday. IFPO has sponsored a webinar on rethinking the role of frontline security staff. An opportunity to present a new image, do you think? Or has it already been messed up? Next week on Wednesday, we've got the launch of the Security Research Initiative report, understanding the influence on security as a career choice and why people are not accepting security as a career. It's quite an amazing set of findings, I've got to tell you. Wednesday, 1:30, and next week we're looking at recruitment as well on Thursday. So much to go on, so much to be done in the world of thought leadership. Once again, thank you very much indeed to my panel for their insights. Absolutely fantastic. Thank you to the audience. I hope to see you on Tuesday, Wednesday or Thursday, wherever you are in the world. I hope that you're safe. Hannah Miller and Christine Brooks in the background are my staff who helped me do this. So from us to you, wherever you are in the world, thank you and stay safe till we meet again.